So, Sid, I know that you are a fan of music and DJing. Have you ever felt charisma lead into that?
Yeah, so this has definitely been challenged for me. So, of course, probably like many DJs, I got a lot of inspiration just from looking at Instagram and such. And I'm always kind of conflicted because there are many DJs who are kind of in your face and they evoke a certain type of energy. Um, Even like the coolness factor, right? They're up there, they're very calm, they're collected. Something about them just there's this air of um I don't know. Maybe it's superiority, basically. It makes you feel like they are like, they just know what's going on. And part of DJing is that, right? Of like kind of being able to read the crowd and know what's next. So it gives me that feeling. Oh, some people, it seems like they just got it, whereas others don't. But recently that has really gotten challenged as I look at some of even the best DJs out there, like Chris Lake, best as in very popular. And then also within my own circle, some of the people that have really done well are actually some of the most awkward on stage. I'll say it right now. One of my big mentors that actually got me the recent gigs, I've been told by so many people, he looks very strange. He's like off, like he's even off beat. And it's like the way he's dancing on, when he's DJing, and it's kind of confusing, but his music is so good. And he's very talented as a producer and also a DJ that I've seen the crowd, like, they just completely forget who's up there. It doesn't really matter because he is more so confident in his own music. He is definitely present. He's just loving what he's doing. And people, I think, uh, jive off of that energy. So I think, yeah, basically the way I've traditionally viewed charisma, especially as something that I'm missing in myself, and it's something that like is more of a trait than a skill. Um, I've started to see how that's not necessarily true. So two things have happened. One is that I don't necessarily think charisma is as important in the traditional sense. And two is that I don't think it's necessarily you have it or you don't. Sometimes you have charisma if you're doing something you're confident in. Sometimes you don't have it. And it's also just a skill you can continue to sharpen.
So, as you were saying that, some ideas pop into my mind, and mainly the definition of charisma. It is something I want to clarify because I think it can be a bit ambiguous. And as you were talking about what it's like to be a DJ and how charisma is essential for success, it got me realizing that charisma is interlinked with control. Control and influence over other people. Maybe it's something that you're doing uh, intentionally or unintentionally, but it's the influence you have over others uh, to have things go your way. And as you were saying this, I was kind of imagining that you were talking about your DJ friend who is awkward when he performs, but performs really well. And it made me realize, well, a DJ in a sense is kind of a puppeteer, and is a puppeteer who is uh, making some motions and pulling the strings on people to have them perform for him or her. And it almost seems to me that the equipment and the people themselves are an extension of the DJ as they are exerting their control over their their audience. So, uh, yeah, I think charisma is deeply linked to control and influence over others. What do you think about that?
Yeah, as I went and looked up the definition, that's literally what it is, right? It says here, let's just read it out loud. Definition of charisma: compelling attractiveness or charm that can inspire devotion in others. So you're right. It's about being able to kind of control or influence other people so that they are devoted to you. They are giving you their whatever intention, their energy, all of that. Um, so I think, right, especially as men in their 30s, we've been conditioned to think we need charisma, right? It is something that we don't necessarily all have, and it's something we should seek to attain. That would help us get more women in our lives. That would help us get more friendships. All of those are like kind of tied to this idea of charisma. Right? Do you agree with that that statement? Yeah.
Yeah, I think if we kind of look at our own lives and try to dissect charisma and how it's important, we kind of create this worldview that we think is necessary. Maybe we can gauge ourselves based on the amount of partners we have, gauge ourselves based on the amount of friends we have, etc. And charisma is a tool for getting those things. But at the end of the day, most of us, I would say, are amateurs when it comes to the theory of charisma, which is why it's really important to look at people who have dedicated their lives to studying charisma. And I think one of the seminal works in this is The Charisma Myth by Olivia Fox Cabane. And Olivia presents the book with the biggest question that you could ask about charisma. Is charisma something that you're born with, or is it something that can be learned? And spoiler alert, the title says it all, that it's a myth, that you were born with it. You can actually learn to be charismatic if you apply a set of principles. And the top 3 principles, I'll just list them out loud, are 1, presence, 2, power, and 3, warmth. And a combination of those 3 and knowing when to apply those 3 is essential for being charismatic. That is, having a way to influence people so that they are devoted to you in some way. Yeah. So I know you have some thoughts about these 3 principles. What do you think about presence? Why is being present important to you? And have you noticed when you're present, the effect it has over other people, on yourself? What is being present and why is it important to you?
Yeah, I did a little digging on this. I haven't read the book myself, but it really got me thinking about uh, kind of these 3 facets. First of all, just an observation. Charisma can still bring us, even though it might not necessarily be something we need, the charm, the devotion, it brings us to something that's really important. All these 3 components, presence, power, warmth, those are all areas that everyone really probably wants more of, and especially men in their 30s. Um, but going back to the topic at hand, presence, I think presence is something that most of us struggle with, and it's becoming harder and harder, right? Like we literally live in a attention economy where we are robbed of our attention, and there are so many kind of distractions that take away from being present. Everything from our the phone to just kind of the culture now. I don't know if this happened to you, but often I've noticed when I talk to younger generations, my little brother or someone, literally mid conversation, all of a sudden they just like went to their phone or stopped paying attention for 30 seconds, a minute. So it's like the complete antithesis to presence. Um, but I think presence to me is really understanding and acknowledging that right now, this moment is the most important, the most powerful thing you could be doing, and finding a way also to silence the chatter, the kind of noise that is around you. So that's where this hiding the self view on Zoom comes in play as well. Right now, I'm looking directly at you. I feel very present with you in the moment. Um, but it also leads me to wonder, like, how does presence relate when it comes to other people? When you're present with someone, can you be present with the world as well? Um,
So I think that from my experience that it, we can only give our attention to one thing at a time. We can lie to ourselves and say we can multitask and have do multiple things at once. And in some ways you can drive a car and have a conversation, but really we can dedicate our attention to one thing at a time. And uh Olivia Fox Cabane in her book, she says there are a few practical ways to maintain presence. We can define presence in various ways, but mainly presence is you are in the moment with the person. Nothing else in this world matters when you're talking to them. That person you're talking to is the most important person, period. She talks about how Bill Clinton was famous for this because when you were having a conversation with him, no one else in the world existed. You could be the constituent from Iowa in a small town. He was talking to you. You were the only person in the world to him. And that made him so charismatic that even his strongest opposition, Republican opposition, would speak to him and they would say, I hate the guy, but when he's talking to you, it's damn near impossible to not love him. And it's because you are the most important person. He makes you the most important person. And everyone loves to feel loved. And if someone is giving you their attention, you feel good. This person is looking at me. They see me. I am not alone in this world. And so in the book, she presents a few different ways of being present. And I've searched beyond the book as well on how to be present, but some practical takeaways. If you're having a conversation with someone and you find yourself deviating or thinking about something else, you can just wiggle your toes. You just wiggle your toes. And as you're wiggling your toes, it brings you back to the moment and it forces you to pay attention to the person once again. You can do that. You can also look at the person's eyes and kind of determine all the intricacies of the colors within their eyes. That's a way to maintain yourself engaged and you're making eye contact. I use that trick every once in a while. If I'm in a really boring conversation, I'll just look at the person's eyes and just really dissect, because everyone's eyes have a little bit of color. No matter how boring you think your eyes are, your eyes have intricacies to them and you can spot them if you look close enough. Another trick she mentions for presence is before the other person speaks, take 2 seconds to pause before you speak. And that's actually the biggest secret when it comes to presence, is that what you have to say doesn't really matter that much if you want to be charismatic. It's really tempting to want to participate in conversation. So you're talking to someone and they're saying, you're telling someone about your day. You said, oh, my weekend was great. I went on a boat and I went across the Chicago. I'm new to Chicago, so I don't even know what the lake is called. The lake. You went on the lake and you went on the boat, and the person you're talking to is like, yeah, and then as soon as you're done talking about your weekend, they immediately say, yeah, my father-in-law has a boat too, and he always takes me every fourth Saturday of the month, and I'm not talking about anyone in particular, but you can tell if someone is listening to you or not, or they just have a thought prepared in their mind and they're ready to jump in. And the secret is when they start nodding their head a lot and you're talking to them, or they're saying, it's because they're waiting to jump, because they stopped listening to you and they just want to talk about themselves. So you're no longer present. So that's the key takeaway. And once you start paying attention to this on yourself, you start noticing it everywhere. You start noticing it when you talk to others. But again, it doesn't matter because you just practice it, and not speaking for that brief moment is important for being present and being charismatic.
I'm taking notes. I suffer from all of these, and especially the head nodding, but maybe that one's a little more obscure because I felt very present while I was nodding my head.
I just want to say I'm not critiquing you in particular. It's just I'm guilty of it too. And people who nod their head appear less present as well. They are not actively listening. If you just, and I do this too, like I'll just try to keep my head still. I'll try not to react to what the person is saying. It's kind of counterintuitive. You think that if you are just like, yeah, oh, like really agreeing with the person or really like matching their energy, it'll make you seem more likable. It'll make you seem more charismatic, but really it does the exact opposite. What you want to do is just appear very as neutral as possible, because that's when you're actively listening. If all of your attention is on that other person, you have no time to focus on nodding, making facial expressions, doing anything. You are just there. And sure, naturally, if they say they make a joke, or if they say something that has an emotional effect on you, then you might react. But reacting preemptively is not charismatic.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah, as you're saying that, I'm starting to practice some of these in real time, like even the pausing before going and kind of responding to what you're saying. And there's a lightning effect to it. Like what I struggle with here is exactly um what I struggle with here is that if I don't have something to say right away, then I feel like I'm not contributing to the conversation. Or to your point, it feels like I'm actually not anticipating and responding or listening to you. But there are other ways to show that, like you said, which is during the time you're speaking, I'm just fully aware and present. And maybe that actually leads me to better thoughts when I'm responding versus here's the pre-programmed stuff I've just been cooking while you're speaking. You're basically multitasking. You're right. Um, so that's a very interesting tip. I think we can all, like you said, continuously kind of practice and reinforce, because that doesn't seem like a like you said, intuitive one or one that's easy, right? Because same thing. I think there's a cultural influence here where the faster you're able to respond in a conversation, especially in a group, right? More likely your voice is going to get out there. As we know, the more you speak, you're literally, I think there's studies that show this, the more you speak, the more confident or smart you appear. So um, these are all very interesting tips. And I think people should, of course, do your own research. It's definitely controversial, but already I feel a sense of peace from doing some of this, and I feel like I'm having a more engaging conversation because I'm able to pause and focus on what someone else is saying, and then also what I'm saying. I guess it's like more so interest in what the other person is talking about or you're talking about. That is the only thing that matters right now.
Yeah, what you have to say doesn't matter that much. And you have to have faith that whatever you're gonna say when the time comes, it's gonna be okay. You you don't always have to jump in. And I will say that these are some practical advice that Olivia Fox Cabane. I love saying her name. It's kind of has an exploit to it. Uh the advice that she gives is really practical and you can implement it immediately, but it is hard and you need to practice it. And I've practiced it for years and I use it whenever I remember. And I use a kind of a feedback loop whenever I catch someone doing the thing that I shouldn't be doing. I'll remember if I see someone nodding their head or saying, uh-huh, uh-huh, I'll know that they're not really listening, but that's okay. Because that means that maybe I should dial back my talking, let that other person get it out. And maybe that's what's missing in the conversation I'm having at the moment. Maybe I'm talking too much. And I do agree with you. Speaking more makes you seem more confident and more qualified for leadership positions. That's something that has been studied as well. And I think there's a balance between all of this. But when you apply the tactics and strategies in the charisma myth, you start to find that balance more naturally. Um, yeah, I definitely think in social situations with friends, it's tempting to just want to jump in immediately. But by being able to hold that desire to jump in, you're actually exhibiting another pillar or principle of charisma, which is power. You're able to hold off that discomfort. Have you ever had a conversation with someone where there's an awkward pause? How I kind of did it right on purpose there a little bit, but the point is, uh, you have that awkward pause, and whoever, especially in a group of people, whoever speaks first is the person that can least tolerate discomfort. And I know I'm getting a little too abstract, and I almost feel like talking about charisma in such a scientific way is like American Psycho esque, where we're like trying to game the system. But really, when you're able to hold off on the subtle silences like that, then you're able to tolerate discomfort, or you're just not bothered by it. You're not uncomfortable with yourself. You are comfortable in your space, in your own body. You're comfortable with silence. So not always jumping in or pausing and making your your sentences come at pointed moments in the conversation adds some gravitas, adds some weight to what you have to say. And that's where power comes in. And I'm going to give a quick description of how the charisma myth talks about power. She talks about a conference room filled with some of the top executives in the world all sitting there. And at the end of the table, there's one quiet man wearing glasses, just with his arms crossed. Everyone is chatting, everyone is bustling. And as soon as the quiet man with the glasses starts to speak quietly, the room goes quiet and listens to him. When you can hear a pin drop, just listens to everything he has to say. And that man is Bill Gates. Because the man has power just with his words. He doesn't have to be loud. He can just exert a sense of control. He has control over the situation. And I think power is intimately related with presence. And I think she talks about this. But when he begins to speak, everyone listens and everyone is present because what he has to say matters.
How much of that is a function of being Bill Gates versus
So, I mean, you could argue that money is power, right? So power comes from different directions, and I probably should reread this book and see how she discusses power. But power is also a mindset. You can actively switch between these three pillars on your own. You can assume that you're present. You can assume that you're powerful. You can take on a more powerful pose, or you can take on a more warm pose, a more welcoming demeanor. And you can switch between these three. And that balance between switching between these three modes of charisma uh, makes you ultimately charismatic. Power is a more tricky one, but I'm curious what your interpretation of it is.
Well, as you talked about the conference room, the first thing that came to mind was a documentary I just watched. It's the one about Uber. Can't remember what it's called, but it's what is it? Joseph Levitt, same guy from Inception's in it. And he's like the Uber CEO, who's notoriously kind of been taken down for his actions and just even the way he treats other people. And in the movie, he is often in a room with kind of higher level execs or venture capitalists, and he is just talking their ears off. Definitely like cannot hold it back and is kind of like very hungry to relate to the other person, that he tries to do it with more words and basically more words. It's like, oh yeah, when you were trying to take over your industry, weren't you crazy and weren't you super aggressive? That's what I am now. And it's almost like he wants, right, the other person to relate to him. So the more words he says, the closer he gets to it in his mind. But of course, the opposite effect is happening. This person in front of him is kind of looking at him and saying, why are you, acting like this? And even if that's how you feel in your head, it's not the right way to present yourself. It's not human, right? It's not very like relatable, because you are just whatever, blabbing on about yourself versus thinking about the person in front of you. So I think when you don't give the other person, or if you talk too much, basically, you're signaling that you are very self-absorbed and you're not able to kind of read the room. Um, which is also a very important piece to this is what came to mind for me. Um, but yeah, when I think of people who are powerful in my mind, they they're very sure of themselves to the point where the words or their what they're going to say in the conversation, like you were saying earlier, that like what you say doesn't matter. I think they understand that because they are more focused about their actions and what they're working on versus what they need to be saying to someone else in order to drive a point. Um, yeah.
I'd almost say, regarding the phrase, what you say doesn't matter, what I, just to be clear, what I meant was what you have to say doesn't matter and what the other person is saying matters more. That's what I meant. I just want to clarify that. So if I'm having a conversation with someone, me saying that what I have to say doesn't matter just kind of shuts my brain off a little bit more and helps me be present and listen to the other person. And then when it's my turn to speak, naturally I will be able to say whatever has to be said because I was really listening to that other person. Uh, what the words that actually come out of my mouth, the words that you actually say, probably do matter a little bit, but also going with you said they don't matter that much as long as you are following presence, power, and warmth. And I think power is a trickier one. Maybe we should revisit it in a later episode, um, as we kind of really dissect it and digest what it means to use power and charisma. But for now, let's move on to warmth. What does that mean to you? What does it mean to use warmth to being towards being charismatic?
You hear my dog in the background?
No,
Wow. Okay. He is just barking like a maniac. So that's pretty funny. Distracting to me, but let me see if I can tune in the presence here. What does warmth mean to me in the context of charisma? I think warmth is really just being very relatable, being someone who you want to be in the room with because you feel like this person holds space for you. Um, it's very tricky for me to not try to associate warmth with like being nice and kind because I think they are actually different things. Warmth is more so, yeah, giving someone, making them feel if you are warm, you are inclusive to this other person in the room. You're going to give them a voice. You're going to give them a chance to speak. You're going to show that you value them. So when I think of warmth, I actually do think of inclusivity, someone who is um, going to include the other person in the conversation in whatever is happening around them.
I like to think of warmth as the feeling you get, and maybe not everyone will relate to this. The feeling you get when you go to a, you know, that cozy grandma's place, and she's got uh, the cookies in there for you. She's got everything ready for you. I can't say I had that experience myself, but I can imagine that experience. Like, it gives me like a warm, fuzzy feeling. And I did a quick AI summary of warmth, uh, and presence and power, and I'll just and at the end we can go over all these brief definitions. But Meta.ai defines warmth according to the or summarizes warmth according to the charisma myth as showing genuine interest in others, which you said, being empathetic and understanding, using positive body language such as smiling, finding common ground, using humor, and also showing vulnerability. Like there's that human aspect to being warm, being that it's okay. I'm not always a powerful tank that's always ready to, you know, fight or do something to gain power, to gain control over others. Warmth is more, you want to help me. You want to take advantage of, I'm using the word take advantage, but you want to leverage the fact that people are altruistic. They want to help each other out. So you want to tap into people's niceness, tap into people's desire to want to help you because they like you, because they are nice and because you are nice. Kind of a simple way of putting it.
Yeah. Vulnerability was definitely the missing piece. For me, actually, that seems like a very important piece to it. Um, because there's two parts to being vulnerable that I think fit really well into charisma. One is the act of being relatable. All of us as humans, we actually do want to be more vulnerable and explain that, yeah, we're not all, robots made of nothing, no feeling. So I think vulnerability puts you in a spot where it shows, hey, we can all be real here. So that's one. Two, with vulnerability, I think is about putting other people's guard down. Now you're showing that your guard is down. It's like, here, now you can easily reciprocate that. So I think vulnerability plays a huge role. And honestly, when I think I'm pretty warm in a lot of ways, and I think people come see me as warm because of that vulnerability, more than anything, right? Finding that common ground. Sometimes it's Dave. You wanted to say something?
I do, but I was listening to you. I'll just say that I think it's I think kind of defining warmth is gets easier if we also think about the opposite of warmth. You know, we think of that person who's very cold, right? They have their arms crossed. They're this, even though they probably want to be talked to, right? Or they want to talk to other people. Maybe they deep down inside they have that, but like they just kind of seem distant and cold, and they they're just their body language reflects a cold personality, as opposed to a more warm person has more open body language. They're more willing to expose parts of their body that might be more vulnerable to, say something piercing. Um, Kind of getting a little bio evolutionary biology there, but body language plays a big role. And when I say that you can, earlier on, I said that you can tap into presence, power, and warmth at a moment's notice. Body language is a part of that. If you take on a confident posture, you're tapping into the powerful side of the side. If you're taking on a more vulnerable state, where you maybe lean back more, or you're just more comfortable, that is more warmth. And the opposite of that, the more cold, is the person who's reserved. Maybe they're shrugging their shoulders, they're protecting their neck, they're protecting their sternum, and everything. That's the more cold person.
Yeah, I'm just imagining us doing this podcast and you being super cold, and I think it would be very, very tough for me to have that full conversation.
Well, but I think there are some people that are really in tune with other people's emotions. Um, and especially women, I think they're really good at this. Uh, where they'll ask things like, "Are you okay? Are you feeling okay?" Even if like you didn't even consider it, they'll ask, "How are you doing? Are you okay?" Purely based on body language. And I think that I've heard numbers being thrown out that uh, our communication is 20% verbal, 80% body language. And there are people who are deeply in tune with that body language, deeply in tune with being able to see what you're really communicating. What signals are you sending out to the world? So you would be able to notice it, pick up something's wrong. And the first thing that uh, Olivia Fox Cabane says in the Charisma Myth, she talks about a situation where a guy is interviewing for the position of a lifetime, and he's meeting the CEO of the company he's interviewing for at a rooftop, and they're having lunch together. And he wears this suit, and he's been practicing for weeks, and he's ready. He's at his peak. But when he gets there, he realizes the sun is in his eyes. It's a little too hot for the suit. And so what happens? He starts to squint. He starts to his body language starts to reflect someone more cold. and less present. And it's not because of what the other guy is saying, but it's because of the environment. And because of that, he gives off a much less charismatic demeanor, and that he fails the interview completely, despite being extremely qualified purely because of his body language. And the CEO can't tell the difference between an environmental factor and an internal factor for that guy. So when we realize that our body language are, and she talks about this as well, being able to identify discomfort and avoiding it or completely removing it from your life, if need be. She talks about even a little thing like saying, "Do you mind if we switch seats? The sun is in my eyes." That is charisma, because one, you show that you're able to, you show your vulnerable side, your warmth, but you can also position yourself to a more comfortable space where you can really show reflect who you really are inside. And this is one thing that I do all the time. I say, "I'm not comfortable. Can we change the situation?" And I actively do this because tolerating discomfort is something that we're indoctrinated with. Probably the open mind word that we use the most. Because I grew up with, you have to tolerate discomfort. Just put up with it. And it manifests itself in many different ways, but tolerating discomfort is a form of lack of charisma. Learning to mitigate discomfort is a key thing to charisma, and it's related to warmth.
Yeah. That also made me think the opposite situation with the CEO. I think warmth is being aware that someone else is uncomfortable and helping them arrive at a different situation. So also in that situation, the CEO could say, "Hey, you look slightly uncomfortable. Would you like to switch situations or settings?" And that would drive so much warmth from that person, right? Because it's that awareness of some, like you were saying, of picking up on someone else's feeling, and then also of wanting to extend the kind of olive branch and say, "Hey, like, do you want to switch whatever the situation so that you are more comfortable, so so everyone can enjoy a better conversation." Um,
I will say that in this very specific scenario, if I were a CEO and I were gauging someone for the position, I may not actively extend that olive branch because I want to see if they were able to do it themselves.
yeah.
Because I I do think that, that's a great mindset that you're maintaining for yourself and being aware of other people's discomfort. Because I think that's another thing that I do as well now that I've started implementing some of these things in my life. I ask people if they are comfortable if something is bothering them. But if in certain scenarios, you might not do that to gauge whether that person is qualified.
Yeah, that's fun. Okay. I could see both sides. I'm just thinking about, like, I guess now it went a little corporate, but I'm just thinking, like, are we giving that person like a whatever, not giving them an equal chance just because they won't express their discomfort. Like you said, some of it is very cultural. Maybe this person is a great candidate. Um, but no, you're right. I think it's an important trait, right? It's a soft skill that people should feel confident or comfortable expressing that they are not comfortable. I think that it can drive, same thing like where we've been talking about. It drives that level of warmth. It shows vulnerability. It says, "Hey, I'm aware of how this impacts me, and I want to change the situation." So definitely makes sense.
Um, you know, I've been interviewed before where I've asked questions or been asked questions. I once had a question of, given you're asked to build a clock, what 5 questions would you ask before you started building it? And uh, this caught me off guard, and I had a lot of thoughts running through my mind immediately, but I paused and and then the interviewer felt uncomfortable and said to me, it's okay. We can switch to another question. I said, no, I'd like to answer this question. I just need a minute to think about it if you don't mind. And that's okay. You can express yourself. Again, vulnerability, warmth. Say, I need time to think about what you're saying. I need to digest. I want to give you a proper answer. And then when I was finally ready, I asked questions that surprised me. I asked, for example, I'll give you an example. I asked the question of what's my budget? And they really like that. That's a question that they hadn't heard before. But my point is being being aware of your scenario and realizing the discomforts are present. For example, time is a constraint when you're in a business setting, but asking for more time can be uncomfortable, but also shows a sense of vulnerability and can tap into the warmth aspect of charisma.
Now, this question is, I cannot focus on the question. What 5 questions would you ask if you need to build a clock? I think I have my 5. Sorry, I'm completely distracted. I just threw everything we talked about it out the window.
That's fine. I'll just tell you. So I'll give you, since we're on this topic, how accurate does it have to be? Uh, what's my timeline? What's my budget? Um, things like that, like accurate timeline, budget, size, and I forget it, something else. Um, yeah.
Nice. I had similar questions, except I was going to add in what resources do I have? So I was gonna go a little general so I can get like more things asked and answered for me. Two of the things was what resources do I have in case there's other people I could just enlist for help. That shows who I am a little bit.
Oh,
Uh, and then what are the specifications? Very similar to the size. It's like, hey, just tell me like what are all the specs I need to know so I can go build this thing. That's a fun one. It's a fun one. I want some good cool interview questions like that.
so this was for a fancy tech company, and I will say, uh, it depends on the job too. In my case, it was a very scientific job, so that's kind of how I was thinking. Uh, I forget if I asked if I could tap into other people. I don't think I did. I think my personality is more I could do it myself, which is something that I actively work on. Um, but yeah, things like how precise does it have to be? But let's let's get back on track. And feel free to steal this question if you're ever interviewing somebody. Um, so Sid, we've talked about uh presence, power, and warmth in the charisma myth. And I want to take a second to give a broad overview of what each of these are. So presence is being fully engaged and focused on the moment, giving others your undivided attention, avoiding distraction, again, like putting your phone away, maintaining eye contact, using open and relaxed body language, and feeling comfortable in your own skin. While power is projecting confidence and self-assurance, showing expertise and credibility, setting boundaries and being assertive, using a strong, clear voice, maintaining a good posture, and dressing appropriately for the occasion. So power conveys authority and respect. And warmth, I'll say this again, is showing genuine interest, being empathetic, positive body language, using humor, and being vulnerable. It conveys approachability and builds uh, connections. So, given those 3 ideas, what do you still want to know? What is important to you in charisma? If you had to ask one question, and we're going back to the clock idea, if you had to ask one question to a charisma expert, what would it be?
That's a great one. Okay. Wow, this clock is going to really guide a lot of great discussions. I'd like a second to think about this.
Sure.
One that I'm still curious about is, and it goes back to the why. Why should I pursue charisma? Like, um, if we go back to the original definition of it's basically evoking charm in order to drive devotion. Um, it's like, how important is this to me? And what am I willing to do, sacrifice to get it? Um, Potentially because we answered so many of the other parts about what you can do. If I was thinking about it from the audience's perspective, the question I would ask myself is there is a lot of different ways we can evoke charisma. What are the ones that fit in your wheelhouse? What are the ones that you would want to focus on because they are playing to your strengths, or what you feel like you would want to see yourself as, right? Because we don't have to be charismatic in all the ways that, drive a higher level of it. We're not robots. What are the ways you would like to be charismatic?